over the past 6 weeks, Joe Biden has been running his presidential campaign from his basement. The presumptive Democratic nominee has held at least 15 live streams from his Delaware home since the coronavirus pandemic began, and they range in topics from town halls with people impacted by coronavirus to endorsements from party leaders like former President Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders. In an article for this week's New York Times Magazine, reporter Jason Zengerle took an in-depth look at the drastic changes that the Biden team has enacted to keep his campaign relevant during the pandemic. And Jason joins me now from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So Jason, walk us through it. We know we're all under lockdown at this point, but what really are the challenges that a virtual campaign has brought for the Joe Biden team?
Well, I think there are a couple challenges. There's a mechanical challenge, just in the sense that, he can't go out into the country. Typically, the way a candidate gets his or her message out is they travel to a place, they have a rally there. There might only be a few hundred people at the rally, but it gets local news coverage. People who are at the rally post about it on social media. That's how they get attention. So he's not able to do that. He has to go down to this studio in his basement and film these appearances and hope that they get picked up on social media and things like that. Then there's also the personal challenge, which I think is a very big one for Vice President Biden. He is a politician who really thrives on personal contact, almost kind of a tactile politician. He really likes to be around people. And now, because of this pandemic, he is isolated in his house. It's just him and his wife, and I think there are a couple of campaign aides who are allowed access to the house, and that's it. He isn't able to have those exchanges that he typically has along rope lines or wherever. And the campaign is trying to recreate that for him. They have him call they call them normal people. At least one a day, oftentimes several. These can be first responders, these can be campaign volunteers, these can be people he might have met on the trail earlier this year, and just check in with them, talk to them, just kind of have that normal kind of human interaction that he so clearly kind of needs just to get his own juices flowing.
You also write, Jason, that to make up sort of for the lack of door knocking and the phone banking that they've done, the Biden campaign's empowering people behind Biden, called Stan accounts like Joe Mama's 2020. How big of a change is that after running a relatively offline primary strategy?
I think a lot of organizing strategy among all sorts of political campaigns has been moving towards the online realm, the virtual realm, for a while now. But the Biden campaign during the primaries really lagged behind the other Democratic candidates. They were very old school in terms of relying on door knocking, relying on phone banking, and even in those areas, not doing that great a job. So the fact that their organizers now cannot go door to door, that their field offices where traditionally you would do phone banking, volunteers would come in, they'd make calls from there. Those are now closed. They can't do that. So they've had to shift to this online organizing, which is something they were not particularly good at to begin with. And they're trying to borrow strategies that worked for some of the other Democratic candidates in the primaries. The Pete Buttigieg campaign did a lot in terms of empowering Stan accounts, as they're called. These were, fans of Buttigieg on social media platforms. The Biden campaign has followed the Buttigieg campaign's lead in reaching out to them, giving them, kind of just training on how they can do their own sort of organizing. And the idea is you empower these people to take some kind of ownership of how they do this stuff, and then they go and they carry your message forward. And it's a recognition that these people are, in a lot of ways, not only organizers, but surrogates and spokespeople, and you can use them in a way to amplify your message, especially now that they can't actually do it in the real world.
We had Tim Murtaugh on yesterday from the Trump campaign. He was saying that it was an easy shift for them because they have done so much digitally, really built up a good digital community that they actually feel confident operating digitally and online. What are some of the issues that you think that the Biden campaign doesn't have that sort of 4-year lead that the Trump campaign has had in building and really organizing digitally?
Yeah, I mean, the Trump campaign, they didn't even really have a campaign in 2016. They had a Facebook operation, and it worked phenomenally well. And they've been able to build on that operation since then, and they've been able to build a campaign around it. The Biden team is really trailing in that department. I think there are a lot of a lot of Democrats who, want to help them and want to bring them up to speed in terms of online campaigning. But it's something that, you can't just necessarily flick a switch and do. At the same time, I think the Biden campaign recognizes that, they have a different kind of candidate. Donald Trump, one of the reasons he plays so well on the internet, plays so well on social media, is because he is controversial, because he's inflammatory, and that content tends to do well online. The Biden people, their theory of the case is that, in addition to the sort of hostile, inflammatory content that does well online, empathetic content, kind of, almost sappy content does well as well. And that's what they want to try to accentuate with Biden's message. He has always been a very empathetic politician, and they want to try to bring those qualities out in their own kind of online messaging. And, I think they believe that those qualities are what's missing right now from the president's handling of the pandemic. And they believe that that's something that voters will rally around when it comes to Biden.
Jason, you just mentioned earlier about how the Biden team's borrowing some other strategies from other presidential candidates. One of them is this idea of community service that the Biden team is really trying to do. Can you explain to us what they're trying to do with that?
Well, in terms of their organizing, I think right now they believe, and I think a lot of other politicians feel this way, that it's a really bad time to be making kind of a political ask of voters. You don't want to be calling them or emailing them asking for money, asking for them to vote for you. What you really want to be doing is using that infrastructure you have to make a connection, almost just checking in on them. So the Biden campaign is having their organizers who are now all, these people traditionally would be out in the states right now doing the door knocking. They're all stuck at home the way the rest of us are. They're making phone calls, and they're called check-in calls, and they just call. These are oftentimes registered Democrats or people who are already Biden supporters, and they just ask them, how are you doing? How are you holding up in this whole situation? Is there anything you need? And if they say have a small business that's experiencing some difficulties, the campaign organizer has a list of resources in that person's state that they can refer them to. If they're having a hard time, getting groceries or something like that, they have social services organizations they can refer them to. And they're just trying to make that connection with the idea that, come November, when they do need to make that ask for that vote, these people will remember that back in the spring, someone from the Biden campaign called them and asked how they were doing and tried to help them.
Jason Zengerle, it's a fascinating look, and it clearly has changed the way we're going to operate this election season. I want to thank you very much, Jason, with the New York Times Magazine, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.